All right, so now we're going to talk about infusions. Everybody dreads infusions. We're using the same formula with the box method, but what's different is that each portion of the formula, the answer is a fraction. And we have to come up with these, usually we have to do some work to come up with the dose and the concentration. Typically, we are looking at the total amount of drug down here and the portion of drug we're giving. But here, we're figuring out the concentration of the drug. And then over here, we're figuring out the dose. So there's usually multiple formulas that we have to use before we can plug the numbers in here. So your patient is a 200-pound patient, okay? And you've been ordered to give 5 micrograms per kilogram per minute of dopamine to your 200-pound patient. So already we see that we're going to have to convert pounds to kilograms. All right. Then we see that our dopamine is mixed 800 milligrams in 500 milliliters. So we're also going to have to figure out what the concentration is based on those numbers. We know that we're going to use a 60 drop set because usually your question is going to tell you what drop set you'll use, and you plug that number in. But if left to choose on your own, knowing it's an infusion, it's a good idea to make a habit of using a 60 drop set, okay? All right, so let's start with arriving at our dose. Well, we know our dose is 5 micrograms per kilogram per minute, but we don't know how many kilograms our patient is, so let's start there, okay? So our patient is 200 pounds, and we know that to convert it, the first thing we'll do is take the pounds and divide it by 2, and we come up with 100. All right, so we know that 10% of 100 is what we have to figure out next. So 10% of 100, so that's 100 divided by 10 equals 10. And then we're supposed to subtract that number from the 100. So 100 minus 10 equals 90. So our patient weighs 90 kilograms. All right, so now we know that if he's 90 kilograms and we're going to give 5 micrograms per kilogram every minute, then we're going to give him 450 micrograms of dopamine per minute. Because we took his weight, we multiplied it by the dose, and we equaled the total dose. So our dose is 450 micrograms in a minute. All right, now the next thing that we're supposed to figure out is the concentration. So remember, our formula for concentration, remember my ridiculous dishwasher concentrate fraction, right? Dishwasher. So that's the dry divided by the wet. So the dry is 800 milligrams. And the wet is 500 milliliters. So 800 divided by 500. We're going to end up with a fraction here. That's okay. Believe it or not, it's going to work out in our advantage. All right, so 800, that number ends here, so the decimal point is there. So 500 goes into 800 one time. And we know we end up with 300 left over. 500 won't go into 300, but if we added another 0 on the other side of this decimal point and then brought it down here, 500 will go into 3,000 1.6 times. All right, so we've got 1.6 milligrams per milliliter. But the problem is we can't administer a fraction of a milligram unless we convert it to micrograms and administer it that way. So remember, if we're going to take a large unit of measure and turn it to a small unit of measure, smaller, and we know that this is 1,000 times greater than that, then we're going to have to multiply it by 1,000 times. And now we can either multiply it and do all the zeros, or we can take 1.6, 1, 2, 3, put the zeros in the spaces, and now we've got 1,600 micrograms in 1 milliliter. So now our units of measure match. 1,600 micrograms in 1 milliliter. So step 1 is going to convert kilograms or pounds to kilograms, and then multiply by dose. Step 2 is going to find the concentration and convert for equal units of measure, top and bottom. Top to bottom. The next part is easy. The drop set, 60 drips per milliliter, and then the easiest part is the 1. Now remember, the answer needs to be in drips per minute, so we know how many drips we're going to run this thing per minute to equal the dose of 5 micrograms per kilogram per minute. So now we just do the math. So we can multiply 450 times 60 and come up with a number, and then we can multiply 1,600 times 1 and do the math that way, or we can reduce the numbers while they're in their places before we multiply. All right, that's usually the easiest thing to do. So if we drop a 0 here and we drop a 0 there, we've already made our numbers smaller, okay? And then we can drop a 0 here and drop a 0 there. Now whenever you drop zeros or cancel zeros out, it can either be this way, top to bottom, or this way, top to bottom. But you can't ever cancel zeros out side to side. Only diagonally top to bottom or vertically top to bottom, but never horizontally top to top or bottom to bottom. Okay? All right, so now what we have left is 45, 6, and 16. And I'm going to tell you we can still reduce these numbers to an even smaller number. If I looked at 6 and 16, I know both of those are even numbers. This is an odd number. So it might be harder to get something that goes in both of these numbers. But since both of these are even numbers, I know I can get, at the very least, I can get 2 to go in there. And sure enough, 2 will go, 6 divided by 2 equals 3. 16 divided by 2 equals 8. And now our math is much easier. All right? So 45 times 3, 3 times 5 is 15. And then I'm going to carry the 1, 3 times 4 is 12. It's 135 over 8. And now we have to divide 135 divided by 8. We know that 8 goes into 13 one time. We have 5 left over, and then we bring this 5 down. 8 times 7 is 56. That won't work. 8 times 6 is 48. And if we do the math, we end up with 7, and 8 times 8 is 64. So it would be 16.8 drops. We do that extra place of math to figure out if we should round it up to 17 or keep it rounded at 16. And since it's 16.8 drops, we'll round it up to 17 drips per minute to equal the 5 micrograms per kilogram per minute of dopamine, as long as it's mixed like this. All right, so 17 drips a minute. How would you do that? Well, if I were going to drip it 17 times, and there's 60 seconds in a minute, I could divide 60 by 17. And 17 will go into 60 about 3 to 4 drips, or a drip every 3 to 4 seconds. So it would be drip, 2, 3, drip, 2, 3. And that way you'll get roughly 20 drips a minute. Now if you wait every 4 seconds, you'll get 15 drips a minute. So you could either just call it even, but picking one or the other. You could change it every couple minutes. The point is that if you're 2 to 3 drips a minute off, and it takes 60 drops to make a difference, you would have to be dripping it for half an hour at off by a couple drips a minute with a 60 drop set before you would make a big difference in dosing. And even then, it's going to be minuscule by just a couple of micrograms. All right, so there's our very long infusion. So the trick is to take it step by step. And just remember, each of the smaller equations are going to help you fill in the slots. All right? Thanks for watching.